When he'd first been taken to meet Claire's parents, the thing he'd been most struck by was how nice they all were to each other, how extraordinarily polite. The parents called each other dearest. At dinner, her mother asked him if she could trouble him, would he mind awfully passing the butter? It had taken him a moment to decode the grammar of this sentence, to grope his way along its abstruse semantic loops. The brother talked voluntarily about a game of rugby he played that day at school. The parents asked Claire Bear, as they called her, about her essays, her lectures, the dates of her exams. The food came in china serving dishes, each with its own lid. They helped each other to portions, and then seconds. It had amazed Michael, and made him want to laugh. There was no shouting, no swearing, no people flouncing off from the table, no silent brooding, no scramble for your fair share of potatoes. No spoons were thrown, no one picked up the carving knife, held it to their throat and cried, "Will I kill myself here and now?" He didn't think anyone in his family would be able to identify the vague area of his PhD. Never mind get down a calendar and write the dates and details of his exams. Never mind reel off a list of books that might be useful for him. Never mind fetch those books from their library. He found their inquiries as to what he was studying, how much teaching he did, whether he had enough time to devote to his PhD, induced a feeling of mild panic. He would have preferred them to ignore him so that he could eat as much as possible of the food, to stare around at the oil paintings on the wall, the bay window that opened onto a sweeping lawn, to absorb the revelation that he was sleeping with someone who still addressed her parents as mummy and daddy. But they would not give up. How many siblings did he have? What did they do? Where had he grown up? That his father worked in a bank seemed to satisfy them, but the disclosure that he was going to Ireland over the summer seemed to cause surprise. Michael's parents are Irish, Claire said, and was it his imagination, or was there a hint of warning in her voice, a slight wrinkle in the atmosphere? Really? Her father turned his eyes on him, as if searching for some physical manifestation of this. He was seized with an urge to recite a Hail Mary, just to see what they would do. "I am indeed," he would announce over the artichokes, horrible, inedible, spiked things they were. "I'm a Paddy, a Catholic, a Mick, a Fenian, and I deflowered your daughter." "Yes," he said instead. "From Northern Ireland or Southern Ireland?" He struggled for a moment with the desire to correct Claire's father. "It's the Republic of Ireland," he wanted to say, "not Southern Ireland. He swallowed, the South." "Ah, but you're not IRA, are you?" His hand carrying food to his mouth stopped. An artichoke leaf hovered in mid-air. A drop of melted butter fell to the plate. He stared at the man in front of him. "You're asking me if I'm in the IRA?" "Daddy," Claire murmured. The man smiled, a quick, thin smile. "No, merely whether you or your family, whether my family's in the IRA." Just an offence. Just an inquiry. No offence intended. Michael had Claire that night at 1 a.m. on her flowery bedspread, and when he realised he hadn't used a condom, he was glad. He was angrily glad. And next morning at breakfast, he was still glad as she sat there irreproachable in a sprigged summer dress on a straight-back chair, helping herself to scrambled eggs and asking her father if she could pass him anything. He was less glad 3 weeks later when she came to tell him that her period hadn't come. Even less glad when, a month after that, he'd gone home to tell his parents he was getting married. His mother had shot him a quick, assessing look, then sat down at the table. "Oh, Michael Francis," she'd whispered, her hand held to her forehead. "What?" his father said, looking from one to the other. "What's the matter?" "How could you do this to me?" "What?" his father said again. "He's knocked someone up," Aoife muttered. "Hey? Knocked someone up, Dad," she repeated loudly, lolling on the sofa, her flawless 14-year-old limbs sprawling over the arms. "Impregnated her, put a bun in the oven, got a girl in trouble, done it. That will do," his father said to her. Aoife shrugged a shoulder, then eyed Michael as if with new interest. "Is this true?" his father said, turning to him. He opened his hands. "This was not meant to happen," he wanted to say. "She wasn't meant to be the one I married. I was going to do my PhD, sleep with everyone I could lay my hands on, then go to America. This marriage and baby were not part of the plan." "The wedding's in 2 weeks." 2 weeks? His mother started to cry. "In Hampshire. You don't have to come if you don't want to." "Oh, Michael Francis," his mother said again. "Where in Hampshire?" his father asked. "Is she Catholic?" Aoife said, swinging her bare foot, biting a crescent from her biscuit. Their mother gasped. "Is she? Is she a Catholic? She gasped. She glanced across at the Sacred Heart that hung on the wall. Please tell me she is. He cleared his throat, shooting a furious look at Aoife. She is not. What is she then? I don't know. C of E, I'd guess, but I don't think it's a very important part of... Their mother lurched from the table with a wail. Their father slapped his newspaper against his palm. Aoife said, apparently to no one, he's got him knocked up a prod. Shut your bloody mouth, Aoife, he hissed. Mind your language, his father thundered. This will be the death of me, their mother cried from the bathroom, rattling the bottles of her tranquilizers. You might as well just kill me now. Fine, Aoife murmured. Who wants to go first? Thank you.
Because I know you were born in Coleraine in Northern Ireland, but you left there when you were 6 months old.
Yeah.
But that your parents have... Oh, well, your dad's Irish and your mother's half Irish. So, but you haven't actually had Irish characters that much in your novels or at all before now. And what, were you wary of that to begin with?
Well, I was a bit wary, actually. I've always been slightly... I've always been slightly wary about writing about Ireland. Partly, well, for two reasons, actually. Partly because, you know, for a very small country, which, with quite a pretty small population, it has produced the, you know, most astonishing number of brilliant writers per capita. And I always felt I didn't really have very much to add to that. You know, it's sort of... You had to be really confident about it to launch yourself into that territory. And also, I've always been very wary of... So I don't know, I feel like so much stuff about Ireland can be very ersatz. I think there's a kind of sense that everybody wants to be Irish. It's funny, one of the first book tours I ever did, I went to Australia, and they handed me my schedule, and on one of the events it was Irish writers talking about Ireland. And I went to the events person, and I said, look, I can't do this, I don't feel confident about this. You know, I was born there and I left when I was 2, and you know, I've been back a lot, my family's Irish, but you know, it's not really right for me to do this. And he said, but you have to do it. You're the most Irish person we have. You know, everybody else on the panel, you know, their great-great-grandparents were Irish, and you know, they call themselves Irish writers. So I mean, so it is something I've slightly avoided. I just didn't. I don't know. It didn't seem right, but just for some reason, it just seemed like the right thing to do. But I mean, I'm writing about it at one remove because, of course. The children, Michael, Francis and Aoife and their sister Monica, are all second-generation Irish, as I am, really, because I haven't grown up there.
Yeah. And Gretta, as we realise from that section, is a sort of beautifully subtle, occasionally comic character with, I mean, lots going on there. She's not a caricature by any means. But were you worried at first? Because a lot of your novels are so beautifully wrought as pieces of writing. Were you worried about tackling comedy or having an element of comedy in this book?
It's funny, I didn't really think it was funny. I was quite surprised when people tell me they find Gretta funny. I mean, I suppose I did, but I find her slightly tragicomic. I mean, she's one of those people who's very adept at rewriting everything in her head. You know, she can, if something's wrong in her life, she can re-edit it and smooth it over as if it never happened. And that, as a kind of personality trait, interested me, which I suppose is where Gretta came from. But I really enjoyed writing about her, actually. I used to look forward to the day when I'd switch on my computer and I knew I had a Gretta moment in front of me. And actually, I'd been trying to get her in focus for a while, and because I knew I wanted to write this book. And I was actually in Galway, slightly by coincidence, on holiday, and we were in a car park, and I saw this kind of stall of weird sort of knitted things, and I can never... resist something like that. So I went over and had a look, and I got chatting to the woman behind the stall who'd done all the knitting, and she was fantastic. And she told me, as often happens in Ireland, her complete life story. You know, she'd moved to London and she'd worked in Lyons Corner tea houses, and we had a long chat, and then I did buy a hat off her. It was hideous, but I did buy it, and because I felt I talked to her for so long. And I bought it, and she said to me, she said, you'll never guess who bought the same hat just a month or so ago. And I said, I don't know, who was it? And she said, Sharon Stone. So apparently I have the same hat as Sharon Stone. I find that slightly hard to believe, but you know. But so I got back to the car park, and I'd said to my husband I was going for 2 minutes, and I'd been gone for about 3/4 of an hour. And he said, where in God's name have you been? And I said, I was just buying a hat like Sharon Stone. As you do. But I didn't realise, you know, as I was talking to her, you have that awful... There is a terrible thing as a writer that you're having a really interesting conversation, and part of you thinking, this is interesting, the other part of you thinking, I can use this is good. Yeah, tell me more. Tell me more about living in a halls of residence while you worked in Lyons Tea House.
It's called Instructions for a Heatwave, and it is set against that 1976 backdrop where the heat is so intense and oppressive that it almost becomes a character in its own right. You were very young at the time, but what made you decide to set the novel against that backdrop?
Well, I've always been very interested in that heatwave. I think it occupies quite an interesting position in Britain's kind of collective memory of itself, particularly that decade, because the 70s was very... it was marked out by huge social and political and economic unrest. I think there were 4 prime ministers in a decade and huge inflation and lots of strikes and the oil crisis. And so it was a decade of huge change and deprivation for a lot. But right in the middle of it comes this astonishing summer that everybody remembers. I mean, you ask anybody who lived through it, you just mention it, and it's as if something odd happens to their expression. It becomes kind of very beatific, and they start talking about standpipes and the T-shirts that said "Save water bath with a friend," and the tar melting on the road, and the A&E filled with people with heat stroke. And it's, I don't know, there's something very seductive about it. And certainly for me, I think for people of my generation, it does warp your perception of what our childhood was like, actually, because I think there is that cliche that your childhood summers were never ending and filled with sun. But actually, for people of the 70s, it was a reality. I mean, even the summer before 75 had been unusually dry and sunny. But I mean, I think that, the more correct word for it would be drought, because actually, on a more serious level, if you read the government document, which I quote from in here, the Drought Act, you realise the panic that the government felt. In between all this kind of very slightly pompous governmental language, there is real terror. They were preparing for a terrible crisis. They were enlisting the help of the army if there was going to be civil riots about water. And it's fascinating to realise that, because at the time I just felt it was this exciting, beautiful summer that never ended, but you realise it was actually quite a meteorological disaster was looming.
And do you think extreme weather makes people behave in surprising ways?
Well, yes, the other thing that kind of informed the book for me was I just sort of started conceiving it when the volcano, which I won't attempt to pronounce, in Iceland erupted, which was, 2010, I think, was it? And I was really fascinated because people started behaving in the most extraordinary way. And normally very sane people were ranting in the streets about meetings they'd missed, or things that got cancelled, or flights that weren't leaving, and visitors that didn't arrive, and people were panic buying bread and, as the ash, commandeering taxis to drive them to Madrid. And it was insane, absolutely insane. And at the time I was thinking, God, this reminds me of something. What is it? What is it reminds me of? And then I realised, I thought, God, it's the heatwave of 76. It was the same sort of slight excitement tempered by fear. Because I think, we are as a race very used to our supremacy. We think that we're in charge on this planet, and something like a heatwave or a volcano or a tidal wave will just remind us that we're not. We're actually pretty insignificant.
Mm.